Hey guys, we're going to talk about some mistakes to avoid for the first time silencer buyer, or even somebody that might have a little experience and wants to know a little more, plus maybe a few buying tips. First, I think it's really important to understand the market and the types of silencers that are available. For instance, do you want a rifle can? Do you want a pistol can? Do you want a pistol caliber can, but for a subgun or a PCC? Or do you just want a rimfire can, right? If you want a pistol can, do you want to shoot 45? Are you shooting only 9mm? Do you want it as a dedicated subgun can or a PCC can? Maybe you think you should just buy a 45 can so everything fits, right? The problem with that is if you primarily shoot 9mm, you're going to be sacrificing a lot of performance along with the weight and the added length. So there's just a bunch of factors that are going to play into your decision, and I think they get overlooked. So I'm going to make separate videos on what to look for with each type of silencer, but that's just some of what you need to consider, right? If you want a rifle can, you want something super quiet and lightweight for your bolt gun, or do you want a hard use can for your 5.56 AR? Are you trying to shoot 300 blackout subs and supers and have it excel in both categories? Or has someone told you to just get a 30 cal can and use it on everything, right? I hear that a lot still to this day. Rifle cans are probably the most popular silencers on the market, and for good reason. There's just so much more to them than just buying whatever 30 cal can you can get a deal on and shooting everything through it. I have made that mistake. I was very disappointed, and we'll get into this in another video, but there is a case to be made if you primarily shoot a 30 cal rifle, but you want to suppress 5.56 every now and then that can work if that's your situation. But I would highly advise you to prioritize that 30 cal rifle for what it needs rather than just finding an in-between option. You're going to end up buying another can, believe me. If you're looking for a rimfire can, there's a lot of good ones on the market. I think today's silencer market, it's pretty easy to make a 22 rifle quiet. You're going to find that the performance difference is really with the pistols. That said, I think in the market, at least in the 22 market, material is probably going to be the first time buyers' most important thing to pay attention to. There are cheap 22 cans down to like 200, 250 bucks. They are generally aluminum. I'll make a video going over 22 cans soon, but currently, once you get over about 350 bucks, you get into the titanium and stainless steel options. It's incredibly important with 22, and I personally wouldn't buy an aluminum can, even with the price difference. Remember, you're going to be buying these for life generally, and while yes, they do have a lifespan technically, aluminum can't just be dropped into an ultrasonic cleaner, and you got to be careful scraping the carbon off it when you're cleaning it, right? So, see, like an aluminum can doesn't need to be super clean. I mean, a 22 can aluminum can. 22 can doesn't need to be super clean, but you're still going to have to chip carbon and lead off of it. If you're using a pick or something, the aluminum's just going to be more likely to get gouged. The big difference, though, at least to the people I know, is that the aluminum versions are generally only rated for 22 long rifle, right? Whereas the stainless and titanium models are going to be rated all the way up to like 5.7, everything in between. Magnum calibers, 17 HMR, stuff like that. And again, cleaning. Just you can buy an aluminum can if you want. If you only shoot 22 in the backyard, you don't shoot a whole ton, sure, maybe it's worth it to save the money, but just something to pay attention to. It may be worth it to just spend a little bit more. You can just drop it in your ultrasonic cleaner or whatever. I think we need to have a realistic view of what guns or hosts we're going to want to use with the can that we're picking, right? One size fits all type silencers are just like the saying goes, jack of all trades, master of none. If you take any advice from me, a dude on the internet with too many silencers, please don't buy a do-all can. You will not be happy, I can promise you. I have seen this a lot, and I have been that guy, so just be realistic with your first one, and look at what you shoot most, or what you feel like you would benefit from most, and buy a can from that, or for that, rather. I personally did not want to buy a 5.56 can at first, because 5.56 is just, it's loud, no matter what you do, it's loud. And I wanted to have my dual 30 cal can because I bought into the hype years ago, and I wanted to be able to shoot subsonic 300 blackout and get that ultimate quiet experience and show off to all my buddies and I ended up with a loud 5.56 can and a slightly less loud, but still loud, 300 blackout subsonic can, right, with that one. If you've not heard of Pew Science, you need to go ahead and give him a follow. I won't get into it here, but he has single-handedly turned the market upside down, and in my opinion, it has been game-changing for the entire market, at least the last few years. But most importantly related to this is I have learned that supersonic and subsonic cartridges do not have the same flow regimes, as he calls them. Basically, the pressure of the cartridge as it exits, they flow at different speeds. So we'll dumb it down a little bit, right? So typically, a silencer is either good at the supersonic flow regime or the subsonic flow regime. They're not generally good at both. So we'll expand on this in another video, but my point is you can't have your cake and eat it too in this situation. Now the newer technology silencers like the Cat ODB, for instance, is an outlier. It does actually have really great subsonic performance as well as being really great on supersonic cartridges, but that's not typical of most traditionally designed cans. So just keep it in mind when you're looking after you've decided which gun to buy the silencer for, right? I have found that I just shoot way more 22 than I ever did once I got a silencer. So I wanted to throw this in there. I was never a 22 guy, right? Never. But with the right can and the right host gun, it can be quieter than any airsoft gun or pellet gun. And it is, at least all the ones that I've shot, right? I've tested it right next to them, back to back. And a lot of the pellet guns and the airsoft guns I've tried are not actually backyard quiet. They're people know you're shooting something, right? And I've got a setup with a bolt action 22 and even a cheap can actually is still backyard quiet. It's really the only way to get movie quiet. And I shied away from buying a rimfire can for a long time because I wanted to buy what I thought was more practical stuff. But I have probably shot more 22 than anything because of it. It's backyard quiet, right? My kids can learn to shoot without being scared of the loud noise. Your friends are going to be amazed at how quiet it is. And they are some of the cheapest cans on the market. So maybe just think about it if you hadn't been. They're a lot of fun. Pistol cans are a bit of a novelty in my world too. I do shoot them occasionally, especially since I've gotten that new Cat SC, because it's incredibly quiet. But if you're doing any real training at the range, pistol can just isn't super practical most of the time. So keep it in mind. If you're planning on going with something for a pistol for your first one, just keep it in mind, right? I'd recommend a rifle can for most people, but everybody has different needs. If you're like me, you like to go to the range, you like to run some drills and primarily shoot ARs, specifically 5.56, I would highly recommend just get a dedicated 5.56 can first. Again, I'll make a video about having a 7-inch 22-ounce can hanging off the end of your AR, but it gets old really quickly. And it is amazing how good a dedicated 5.56 can be. Once you have picked which host firearm you want to suppress first, you're going to need to figure out a few things, right? Mainly, how are you going to attach it? We're going to start with rifles. Essentially, you just need to make sure you have a threaded barrel, right? They need to be concentric threads, but if it's factory threaded, it's probably okay. You'll need to check anything that you attach a silencer to with an alignment rod before you shoot it, but you're usually okay, right? So you would just, if you're not familiar with this, you buy an alignment rod for whatever caliber the rifle is, and then you're going to attach your silencer to it, and you'll stick the alignment rod down the bore and just make sure it's lined up straight with the end of the silencer and not contacting the sides or leaning off to the side where you might get a baffle strike, right? If you don't have a threaded barrel, just contact a gunsmith, see if the barrel can be threaded. Sometimes the barrel profile is too thin. It's not able to actually cut the right threads into the barrel. But, I find that's mainly only a problem on bolt action hunting rifles, maybe some cheaper older 22s. AKs have a reputation of not being concentric. How do I explain it? It just means that the bore, picture the bore line and the outside of the barrel, they're not perfectly in line. So the threads may be cut, but the barrel, inside of the barrel is cut at a different angle, right? So AKs get fairly complex fairly quickly, and there's a lot of variables, so we're going to leave them out of it for now. If you have an AR and you have a flash hider on it, unless you're in a state where threaded barrels are illegal or you had to have it pinned and welded to make it 16 inches, you'll just have to unscrew that flash hider, take off the washer. I don't have one here, but typically the birdcage has a little washer under it. Just take that off. You're not going to use that. It is generally a crush washer, and it will not align straight, right? So as you tighten it, it's just going to cock to one side, so take that washer off. I'm going to do a whole video on rifle mounts, but basically you just have to decide what type of mount you want to go with. You have a direct thread option, so something like this, where it would literally just thread directly onto your barrel. Silencer is going to have threads, or you have a mount that has threads, and then you're just going to thread it on the barrel and tighten it up. The market has gone to mostly what they call QD, or quick detach systems. It's been argued that they should be called quick attach rather than detach. It's neither here nor there. I don't care. These systems use a special muzzle device. For instance, this is Q's Plan B. It's very popular. Not specifically this one, but the market has adapted this, and there's third-party vendors that use this design, so that they'll have different types of flash hider styles, but they'll all fit the same mount. But these systems use a special muzzle device, and then they'll have a corresponding mount that goes on the silencer, and then they just thread together. Most everything now is taper lock, so this is a perfect example. You can see all that carbon on the end there, but because of that taper there, it seals off all the gases to the front, and the gases don't get down into your threads. So this is a good option, especially if you need to take it on and off, to put it in a bag or whatever. They do add weight though. They do add some length. The Q system is really short and really light. The CAT system is really short, really light. But there's a ton of options out there. That's just two of the standard options, right? Direct thread or QD. You will see these what's called hub threaded, HUB. You might wonder what it means. They basically, it's a new standard. So all of these mounts I have set up here are hub threaded. It just means that the user can attach whatever mounting system they want to that can, right? So this can be a great option for somebody who likes to try different things, like me. Or maybe you have a pinned muzzle device of a certain type, and you need to use a certain type of mount because it's pinned on there and you don't want to change it. So, the thing you need to look for, so all of these are different hub mounts. This is a Huxworks. This is a Surefire that you can't get anymore, but basically this would allow any hub threaded can to attach to a Surefire muzzle device. And then you've got systems like this, where this is Huxworks system, so it uses Huxworks specific flash hider, and then their can. It's not threaded, hub threaded. It's just threaded for their mount, so it's part of the can. So you can't change it. You can only use theirs, right? This is another thing that gets touchy as these cans get more advanced. The flash hiders or the whatever device the manufacturer designed may work best, right? So it may be part of the actual system, and it's something to consider. It's not always best to go hub and be able to change, every mount to whatever you want, because it may actually affect your performance negatively, right? It could go better, but probably going to affect it negatively. I have found in most traditional cans, the only thing I've seen is like with a Polonium K, if I put a really short mount and I take up a lot of that blast baffle space or that blast chamber space, I did notice a little bit more gas blowback, which was interesting because I only changed, I mean, it was maybe a half inch. Subguns, pistol caliber carbines, they're going to fall into mostly the same mounting type as rifles, but you may have something with a 3-lug mount, like B&T or H&K, obviously, because that's their mount. That's where it came from. That would be the only real difference. But in that case, it's just as simple as buying whatever the appropriate 3-lug mount to go with your can, right? So again, you can get, there's a couple different, these are hub threaded 3-lug mounts. So if you had a hub threaded 9mm can, these would just go directly into it. Or you can get cans like this B&T can, for instance, that has a 3-lug setup built right in. So you can't change it. It's 3-lug only. This one in particular is a push button, so it's a little bit different. But you just literally push this onto the 3-lug. You don't have to twist it. But yeah, so there's a couple of different options. But 3-lug stuff is going to be the only real exception. Otherwise, PCCs or subguns are going to go into the rifle mount stuff, as long as it's the right bore. Tuning your host, right? So you also need to keep in mind the gas blowback and back pressure is a real thing, and if you're planning on using a semi-automatic rifle as your host gun, you're going to need to think about tuning, right? If you stick a silencer on the end of a gun, it's basically a muffler, you're going to have more back pressure on it, or gas built up in the system, and this is going to cause you problems, or can at least, right? So it could just be a little extra gas in the face, or it could be so bad that it damages components in a rifle from excessive wear rather quickly. Actually, some of them can. It's all dependent on the can you pick and the host firearm that you're putting it on. We're going to start with pistols. Most handguns, there isn't a ton of stuff you can do to them. I don't have a ton of experience suppressing different pistol hosts, mostly Glocks, but you do have different recoil springs you could try if you're having issues cycling. Every can I've ever thrown on a Glock, for the most part, just runs, but I'm sure they could still be optimized if you wanted to. I usually just don't consider tuning a pistol for a suppressor, but you certainly could, right? I have tuned a Ruger Mark IV with different recoil springs to run different ammo, but it's 22, and it's not really something I would depend on for my life. Whereas I don't know if I'd go tinkering with my main home defense rifle, home defense pistol, if it only runs with that can, or to make it shoot softer. I would much rather it just run, right? So really, I wouldn't sweat it too much on the pistol end. If you're running a subgun or PCC that's direct blowback, you're also in the same boat as the pistol, most of the time at least, where you're limited to different springs or buffers, depending on the host type. For AR-based PCCs, you could swap buffers, you could swap springs, but there's no gas tuning because it's direct blowback, right? Semi-auto rifles, on the other hand, this is where I want to focus this whole tuning section, right? Tuning is pretty critical for a good user experience, depending on the can that you choose. If you go with a traditional baffle can, as opposed to like a more expensive low back pressure setup, you're probably going to get gas in the face, right? It's dependent on a bunch of different factors, but just keep it in mind. If you save $300 because you bought X can over Y can, but Y can is a low back pressure setup and it doesn't really require any tuning to work, you'll probably end up spending that money that you saved on adjustable gas blocks or buffers or springs or whatever to tune that, to make it not miserable to shoot. I'm sort of focusing this whole section on suppressing ARs. I feel like that's probably the most common, but your options for tuning are basically swapping your buffer for a physically heavier buffer, right? So if your rifle came with what we call a standard carbine buffer, you could get an H2 or an H3 buffer to add some weight behind the bull carrier group, and slow the action down a bit, or you could get a stronger spring, the buffer spring. But generally the most effective way is to do it by swapping the gas block for an adjustable unit. I don't have one here. I thought I had one here. You can use a bolt carrier group that has a little gas valve in it, such as the one from Bootleg. And it's not something that you can like fine tune. I think it has 4 different settings on it, but it is literally a drop-in part that doesn't require any permanent modifications, and it works pretty well. I have one. I've used it a bunch. It does the job. It's not as good as say an adjustable gas block, but adjustable gas blocks have some other cons we're going to talk about. All right, so adjustable gas blocks, by far most effective way to do it, but they're just not always the most reliable things in the world. You typically won't see ones that you can run a pin through, like a factory or a mil-spec rifle, or a mil-spec gas block would be. So they have the potential of loosening up, and the adjustments, the little adjustment screw, they tend to get seized up over time. Anecdote, I have been testing I don't have that either. The superlative arms unit that has the vent on the front of it, I think I'm a little over 3,000 rounds on one of my rifles, and it's holding up great. It's really surprising. It's on an 11.5 too. It's still adjustable. It hasn't locked up. It hasn't come loose, and so I'd look into theirs if you do want to do an adjustable gas block. It has the option. The whole principle is it's supposed to be venting the gas out of the front of the block, so it doesn't. I guess it relieves or puts out some of the buildup out of the front rather than getting stuck on the end of the adjustment screw. But you can run it. It has both options. You can run it as a closed system, or you could run it as a vented system. I have been testing it in the vented mode, but a buddy of mine, we put one on his build, and with a rugged Razor 7.62 on 5.56, it didn't have enough adjustment in the vented mode to tune that particular rifle. So, but those are my only 2 examples with that. I know Jay from Pew Science has been using one, and I think he likes it a lot too. The last thing, or the last way I'll talk about tuning an AR is with a product from Black River Tactical, I think is the name. They sell a gas tube called the Easy Tune, right? So I ran one of these in one of my LMTs, the Spec-Or, for a long time with a traditional baffle can, actually with the Polonium K. So I ran this Polonium K on the LMT for, I don't know, 2,000-3,000 rounds, something like that. And I got a more modern lower back pressure can. I think I put the Flow 5.56K on it, and I ended up swapping back to gas tubes. But the LMTs in particular, you can't just put an adjustable gas block on them, right? They have a proprietary pressed on gas block, so just swapping it out isn't really an option. So I ended up trying the tubes out, and they're awesome, and it worked out great. So I liked it so much, I ended up putting it in an old Daniel Defense rifle I have, so I can keep a pinned gas block on it and not have to worry about moving parts or breaking and seizing. You can swap a gas block on most ARs in a matter of minutes, by just pulling the handguard off, pushing out a pin that holds the tube in, and then literally just snaking it out. It's really easy. So I don't have one, so with a handguard off of it, but it's really easy. So don't get intimidated. The way they work, basically, they have a restrictive orifice in the end of the tube, so it restricts the gas at the end of the tube. The downside, you can't adjust it per se, right? So you can pick an in-between setting and live with it. So BRT, basically Black River Tactical, the people that sell them, they have options. So they will pick a size for you if you just tell them what your rifle is and what type of can you want to run on it. You can also choose if you want to shoot it with and without a suppressor, or with the suppressor only, and then they'll send you a tube, right? So obviously if you say you want to shoot it with and without the can, it's going to be a little more gassy with the can on. So I'd suggest just going with the 100% suppressed option. You're not going to take your can off once you start shooting suppressed, but to each their own. Once you do have a can though, you'll never shoot without it, like I said. So unless you didn't listen to my advice and you bought a can that sucks. So build materials. I touched on this a little bit with 22 cans, but what the can is made out of can make or break your setup. In silencers, you're going to see aluminum, stainless steel, titanium, Inconel, some other variation of Inconel, or a mix of all of them. Aluminum is typically reserved for 22 cans, and I don't personally recommend them, but I have seen some aluminum centerfire cans too. But primarily, centerfire pistol and rifle cans are going to be steel, titanium, or Inconel, right? So you need to know what the application is that you're going to be using a can for, and then buy the most practical option. I'm not going to touch on aluminum. I don't know any. I don't have any first-hand experience, but the experience I do have would say to just spend a little extra and buy something more robust. We talked about it earlier, but aluminum can't just be dropped in an ultrasonic, and it's a very soft metal. So picking it while you're cleaning a 22 can, it might gouge it or whatever. I just wouldn't buy one. So if you would, that's great. Have a good time with it. I do want to preface it by saying that these statements are all going to be generalities, and while a lot of them are generally true, I would like to add that a lot of these newer companies, or not newer companies per se, but the newer technology, guys are starting to design baffle geometry and silencer design in general to take advantage of certain materials, whereas rather than just designing a system and then changing the material just because, right? They're starting to use that material while they're designing it with that in mind. So, again, you may find outliers where, titanium doesn't work in this 5.56 can, but it works really well in this 5.56 can, and it doesn't erode the same. But we're just going to talk about, in general, what are the materials good for, what are they typically reserved for, stuff like that. Titanium. Some people see titanium in the same light as aluminum. They think it's brittle, they think you have to baby it or it's going to explode. Some people see titanium and think about how light it is and its strength to weight ratio and think it's a great material for a silencer. But titanium has a few properties that may keep you away from it, but its main weaknesses is heat, right? So most titanium cans have a lower heat threshold than a stainless or Inconel version. Titanium is generally reserved for bolt-action rifles, pistol cans, or other applications where a low rate of fire or lower-powered cartridges would be used. Titanium cans will spark due to the material being hit by little fine particles of gunpowder or lead or whatever. But the material basically reacts and it visibly sparks off the end, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? So in the last couple of years, there has been a resurgence of titanium being used on short barrel 5.56 applications with different baffle designs and different titanium blends from people like Cat, Cobalt Kinetics, or Huxworks. So like this little tiny Cobalt Kinetics can is titanium, and it works great on this 5.56. So I have been testing this for a little while, and it's really impressive, I have to say. So don't just write it off, right? So again, I have some of them. I will say, as long as you keep it under the heat limits, they are fantastic options. As long as you don't care about the sparking, that's a big thing. So the sparking will generally subside a bit after a few hundred rounds, but you can't get rid of it fully, right? Cat titanium cans, at least the ones I have, they cool down insanely fast. And in my testing so far on that same 14.5 5.56, I would take like 2 to 3 mags straight through it with a pretty fast rate of fire to try and get it to its heat limit, and it would drop a couple hundred degrees just while loading a new mag. So I don't think it's the material you should necessarily buy for a 5.56 application, but don't write it off totally, if that makes sense. So the lack of weight on your front end of your rifle, like on something like this that's super short, is really nice, right? So I'm able to have a long can to keep the 300 blackout really quiet, and it doesn't weigh anything. It's amazing. So in that application, it's pretty awesome. Or if you're using it for, a home defense setup, it's not something you're burning down rounds through. It might be a good option. Um, Again, some of these newer cans are being designed with that material as part of the design, so they minimize the negatives, and I'm finding that to be true, at least in my testing, and I believe Jay at Pew Science touched on that as well. Stainless and Inconel, right? I'm going to talk about stainless and Inconel together. They're generally reserved for your hard use materials, something you throw on your main fighting rifle, something you don't have to worry about as much with heat. So something like, this is the big one, the big Surefire. This is the RC3, but Surefire kind of started the whole Inconel thing back with the original RC. But there's many variations of these materials, right? So Inconel is a brand of alloys, but it's been coined as kind of the industry name for different variants. Lately, there's been a labeling with the 718 variant, as a lot of the 3D printed cans are using this. But with stainless, you'll generally see 17.4. If you know anything about metallurgy at all, you know that heat treat is incredibly important. And while most people will say Inconel is the way to go if you want to go to war type setup, like a Surefire or something, but it's not always the case, right? I'm not going to name names, but I've got a certain can that's got Inconel baffles that's been fired much less than on the same gun as a 718 can, my Polonium K, and there's only one that has noticeable baffle erosion. Right, it's the Inconel version. I found out that I believe they are cast Inconel. I'm not sure if other people use that. I'm not sure if it's just the baffle design in general, but that Polonium has a lot less baffle erosion than the Inconel can I was shooting before it, right? And stuff like that, how charge flow, the way it works and the way that it doesn't have hard stops on baffles and it's constantly flowing through it. It's 17.4, I believe it's 17.4. It's definitely steel, but it doesn't really need that Inconel. It doesn't have the same type of erosion that other cans do, where it wears away at that center bore as much. So it can keep the cost down if you just go stainless over Inconel. If you find that you don't really need it. Final thoughts. So the last thing I'm going to mention is don't get caught up in trying to suppress everything you own, right? This is the same idea as the one-size-fits-all can, but I just want to stress it because I've been there. I know it's a lot of fun to think about all the guns that you can put whatever can you buy on, but realistically, it's a pain in the ass to sit at the range and try to swap mounts and whatever else you can, especially with a hot suppressor. You may do it once or twice, but I assure you, especially if it's a rifle can, you're going to quickly find out that you're not doing it like you thought you would, and removing a hot can on most mounts is almost impossible. I have swapped my pistol can onto everything from pistols to subguns to 300 blackout subs in the same range trip early on, and it's just not fun. It's dirty, it's hot, you got tools and pieces everywhere, and your buddies are all having more fun than you shooting just one or two things, right? So your first can, in my opinion, really needs to be something that you're going to enjoy on your main host first, right? And if it happens to be something that works for other things, that's great, but I would try to get that out of your mind as a first-time buyer, and I think you're going to have a lot more enjoyable experience with a dedicated can for your main firearm. You will most certainly buy another one, I promise. I know this video was long. I still feel like I cut out a ton of information, so if you stuck it out with me this long, thank you. This took me a lot longer to get together and put out than I expected, and I hope it was helpful. I'm going to be adding some more content here and there on my Instagram channel, which is also at Night Owl Armory. So check it out, like it, subscribe. Please leave me a comment if you want to see something specific. I'm going to start doing some reviews and some comparisons once I get past this little intro series. But for now, I'm going to make some videos on mount types, what to look for in different hosts, things like that, right? Because I'm hoping to help the newcomer. I want the industry to grow. I want silencers to become common use. So thanks for watching.